Growing up in the 2000s, there was an odd gaming phenomenon that I feel doesn't get discussed very often. It's the Halo kids versus the Call of Duty kids. I remember distinctly that these two groups of kids didn't cross over very much. Sure, there was the odd one here and there, but at the end of the day, you either had Call of Duty diehards or Halo diehards. I myself was a Halo diehard, if you couldn't tell by the content I put on my channel. But it went beyond just Halo. I am a massive sci-fi fan. Before I fell in love with Halo, I had Star Wars. And after Bungie Halo ran its course, I fell into Mass Effect, then the book series of Red Rising, and more recently Warhammer, and yada yada, you get it. I like space. That's why when Call of Duty Infinite Warfare was announced back in 2016, I was intrigued. A franchise known for its grounded, modern military shooters was making the leap into space, into my territory. It had the potential to bridge the gap between two worlds, science fiction combined with the gritty warfare that Call of Duty is known for. But color me surprised, when this trailer dropped, the discussion surrounding this game was nothing short of vitriolic. Everyone, and I mean everyone, was dunking on this game. I mean, just look at the comments and dislikes on this video nearly 10 years later. With all this hate surrounding the game, I decided to pass on it, and time just went on. Cut to a little bit ago, and I decided to analyze the Call of Duty series. As I said in that video, I looked to forums, videos, and whatever discussing the top Call of Duty campaigns, and I kept seeing a pattern. People were saying that Infinite Warfare had one of the best Call of Duty campaigns, followed by a flood of people who haven't played the game absolutely shitting on them for having said opinion. But the thing is, this exchange was common. Very common. So common, in fact, that I had to take a step back and run the numbers just to see how many people were talking about this game, and it turns out a lot of people love this game. But what's fascinating was that nearly the same amount of people absolutely despised this game too. Needless to say, I was intrigued. So I bought myself a copy of Infinite Warfare, and let me tell you, Call of Duty Infinite Warfare is one of the most misunderstood Call of Duty games of all time. While I would recommend you all go out and play this game for yourselves, I understand a lot of you probably haven't, so I'm going to break down the entire story before getting into my analysis. To begin, let's talk about Earth and Mars. At some unknown point in time, Mars was colonized in order to combat Earth's dwindling energy and rare Earth resources. However, by 2157, 30 years before the events of the game, an insurgent group called the Settlement Defense Front, SDF, staged a coup, seizing control of Mars and executing Earth loyalists. In response, the nations of Earth formed the United Nations Space Alliance, or UNSA, to manage space operations and counter Mars's growing influence. This began the Secession Wars. Initially, the war was a localized struggle between Earth's colonial government on Mars and the SDF. However, it soon escalated into a full-scale war that spread throughout the solar system. The conflict ended in a stalemate, with the signing of the Charon Accords, which recognized the SDF as an independent, totalitarian state with Mars as its capital. In the aftermath, Earth's nations unified under the UNSA, and both sides maintained contested territories, with frequent border skirmishes occurring despite the peace. Jumping to 2187 in the actual events of the game, Infinite Warfare begins as a three-man team is dispatched to investigate the sudden loss of contact with the UNSA R&D facility on Europa. After successfully skydiving onto the planet's surface, they infiltrate the facility and secure the F-SPAR energy weapon prototype. While escorting the weapon out of the facility, they are ambushed by SDF troops, forcing them to escape through an airlock onto the icy surface. Injured and unable to call for help, SDF Admiral Salen Koch arrives for a brief interrogation before recovering the weapon prototype and executing the UNSA soldiers. After a briefing from Admiral Rains about the failed operation on Europa, Lieutenant Nick Reyes joins Lieutenant Nora Salter as the two meet Petty Officer First Class Enhanced Tactical Humanoid 3rd Revision E3N, or simply Ethan, to patrol the Fleet Week parade. However, the event takes a chaotic turn when the anti-air targeting interception system guns unexpectedly target the UNSA fleet, leading to a massive Settlement Defense Front invasion and causing the group's shuttle to crash. As they fight through the city, the team reaches the AATIS control tower, where they encounter a rogue worker attempting a bombing. The worker, revealed to be a set-def sleeper agent, warns them of future attacks, before being taken into custody. Reyes, Ethan, and Salter then take to orbit to fend off the remaining set-def forces when a surprise attack from a massive set-def warship, the Olympus Mons, forces the UNSA warship, Retribution, to ram into the enemy ship, causing the Olympus Mons to retreat, but subsequently resulting in the captain of the Retribution and his executive officer to both perish. Landing on the Retribution, Reyes and Salter make their way to the bridge, where Rains promotes Reyes to the rank of captain in the midst of the crisis, tasking the Retribution with pushing back the SDF's assault on the moon's lunar gateway. Reyes, Salter, and Ethan join up with Staff Sergeant Omar and his men to push back the SDF incursion. After this mission, the campaign begins to open up, and we are able to play various side missions all across the system, fighting over planets like Venus, Uranus, or Neptune. Since most of these really don't impact the main narrative, let's just focus on the main missions. The Retribution is eventually tasked with going to Saturn's moon of Titan to destroy a set-def methane processing facility. Gearing up with Omar, Ethan, and the Marines, the team take a shuttle to the moon's surface. Sneaking through and taking out set-def soldiers, the operation is disrupted after the Olympus Mons arrives and rains hell on Reyes' team. Eventually getting in a ship, Reyes and Salter are able to destroy the pumping facility and escape to orbit, where the Retribution is overrun by the Olympus Mons before Reyes can dock. He orders the Retribution to leave as he and Ethan bail out of his shuttle. As they drift into space, Reyes' suit is punctured and he passes out, only to wake up on the UNSA ship Tigris. Reyes learns that after he went missing, Salter called for help, but Admiral Raines denied her request, stating he can't sacrifice 5 men for 1. So Salter reached out to the Tigris, who sent a rescue party and saved Reyes and Ethan. The Retribution is then tasked with investigating the sudden loss of communications with the Vesta 3 mining colony on an asteroid in the Mercury cluster. Upon arrival, they discover the asteroid had been knocked off course and is now dangerously close to the sun. Reyes and his team embark on a search and rescue mission and find the facility in ruins. The miners are either burned by the sun's heat or killed by rogue security drones. The drones activate whenever the sun rises, increasing the team's urgency as they fight to survive and reach the control center. Inside, they discover surviving miners and learn that the Olympus Mons caused the asteroid's displacement. As the team prepares to evacuate the miners, they are met with heavy resistance from the drones. In the chaos, an explosion knocks down Reyes, and Omar hands him a weapon to cover their retreat. As Omar attempts to save a wounded miner, he is caught in another explosion. Despite Reyes' protests, Omar orders the team to leave him behind and prioritize the mission. Salter makes the painful decision to evacuate, leaving Omar and the remaining miners behind as the asteroid crumbles in a series of devastating explosions. After returning to the bridge, Reyes learns that the Tigris is under attack and orders the crew to head to its last known location. Upon reaching the Tigris' location, the crew finds the ship reduced to wreckage, drifting in space. Reyes insists on sending a rescue team, but Salter and Gator confirm that the ship is a total loss. At that moment, they intercept a signal from Koch, who declares the destruction of the Tigris and vows that the SDF will stop at nothing to annihilate their enemies. Instead of informing Raines, Reyes takes control, declaring that they will choose their next mission and not be dictated by circumstances. He gathers the crew and outlines a plan to turn on the set-def sleeper agent's transponder used in the Geneva attack against the SDF by luring the enemy into a trap back on Earth. However, en route back to Earth, the sleeper agent escapes, destroys the AATIS guns, and triggers the beacon. The SDF fleet arrives and the Olympus Mons destroys UNSA headquarters, killing Admiral Raines. Out of options, Reyes boards and takes control of the Olympus Mons, killing Admiral Koch. He then attempts to use the ship to destroy the SDF's orbital shipyard on Mars, but is then forced to ram it after sustaining heavy damage. However, the Retribution accidentally drifts into the Olympus Mons' path, causing both ships to crash onto Mars with the shipyard still intact. Reyes and the last of the survivors then lead a final assault on the shipyard. Most of his crew dies in the ensuing battle, but Salter is able to commandeer an SDF destroyer. However, its weapons are disabled and the mooring clamps are locked. Ethan is forced to sacrifice himself in order to destroy the moorings, while Reyes activates the destroyer's weapons and orders Salter to destroy the station, despite him still being on it. Salter reluctantly opens fire, ejecting Reyes into space. His last sight is of the SDF shipyard being destroyed before he is killed by shrapnel. Later, Salter looks over a memorial, where the UNSA honors Reyes and the Retribution's crew for their heroic sacrifice. And we learn that of the 767 officers and crew aboard the ship, only 4 survived. Okay, so Infinite Warfare is a game all about sacrifice. Within the first hour of the game, we are met with themes and comments all about this idea. You start to realize that this story isn't just another entry in the Call of Duty franchise. It's one that seeks to explore deeper, more human experiences in the face of war. The game's protagonist, Captain Nick Reyes, isn't the untouchable, unstoppable soldier that we've seen in other entries. He's a character who constantly faces impossible decisions, often leading to the loss of both allies and innocent civilians. Whether it's ordering a desperate retreat or making the call to send soldiers into a suicide mission, the weight of command bears heavily on him. In Infinite Warfare, you get the sense that no matter what he does, someone somewhere is going to suffer for it. The game makes sure you feel the toll that this sacrifice takes on both him and the people around him. The most striking part is that Infinite Warfare doesn't treat this as a single narrative beat, but as its central theme. Throughout the game, you are constantly reminded that the cost of this interstellar war is incredibly high, and it's not just about body counts or destroyed ships. It's about the emotional and psychological toll on those who survive. The crew of the UNSA Retribution, for example, becomes a microcosm of this theme. Each major character, be it Salter or Ethan, deals with sacrifice in their own way, whether it's through humor, loyalty, or sheer determination. In a lot of ways, this game reminds me of Halo Reach or even Mass Effect. These are stories where deep down you know that winning might come at a price, and sometimes that price is everything. By the time you get to the game's climax, it's clear that this isn't a simple good guys win, bad guys lose scenario. The final mission makes it painfully clear not everyone gets to come home. What's really fascinating is that the game was bold enough to subvert the usual tropes of the Call of Duty campaigns. Instead of making you feel like an untouchable action hero, it makes you feel vulnerable to loss, to failure, to the consequences of your decisions. It's rare to see a shooter, especially one in this franchise, embrace this level of emotional weight, but Infinite Warfare does it remarkably well. However, this isn't to say that Infinite Warfare is the perfect game. When examining the game outside of the characters and interactions, a lot of its narrative falls flat. And I mean falls flat hard. Case in point, the Settlement Defense Front. They make no goddamn sense when you start to apply logic to them. They are a Martian ultra-nationalist totalitarian regime that have zero redeeming qualities. Now, that's not to say that every villainous faction needs to have a redeeming quality, case in point, Nazi Germany, but if you are designing a fascist faction, at least make their rise to power seem legitimate or even make sense. Because you're telling me at this point in human history, Mars has enough of an army to launch a full-scale invasion of Earth and actually do substantial damage? Even if Mars isn't heavily dependent on Earth for resources, the fact that they somehow have not only built a self-sufficient military, but one so powerful that it can effectively challenge Earth's planetary defense systems, it's a stretch, to say the least, even if they said Earth's resources were nearly depleted. Not only this, but even if we suspend disbelief about their military might, the motivations behind the Settlement Defense Front feel shallow. The game presents them as this monolithic evil, but they lack the nuance that would make them compelling or believable. Why are they so hell-bent on destroying Earth? Is it purely about Martian independence, power, revenge? We don't really know because the game never takes the time to explore these questions in really any meaningful way. The SDF feels more like a plot device than an actual fleshed-out faction, existing solely to give the players someone to shoot at. Compare this to other great villain factions in gaming. Take the Covenant from Halo, for example. They are a religiously fanatic alien coalition that, while undeniably brutal, has depth. Their motivations are rooted in religious dogma, fear, and cultural superiority, making them a multi-layered antagonist. Even Call of Duty's own Modern Warfare series provides us with villains like Imram Zakhaev or Vladimir Makarov, whose loyalists had clear motivations tied to their worldview and personal history. The SDF, on the other hand, lack any of that complexity. This lack of depth also undercuts the stakes of the story. It's hard to get invested in a war when the enemy feels like a cardboard cutout of generic bad guy. Their leaders, like Admiral Koch, played by Kit Harington, comes off as a one-dimensional caricature. There's no charisma, no clear ideology beyond Mars good, Earth bad. And he doesn't have room to grow because Koch is barely in the game to begin with. In a narrative that's trying to convey themes of sacrifice and the cost of war, you need an enemy that feels like a legitimate threat, not just physically, but ideologically. Koch and the SDF simply don't deliver on that. What's worse is that this shallow portrayal of the SDF undermines the more compelling elements of the story. The crew of the Retribution are forced to make tough decisions and endure tragic losses, but these sacrifices would hit much harder if the enemy felt more dangerous or complex. Without that, it can feel like you're fighting against a faceless force, reducing what could have been a rich conflict to just another space battle. With all that being said, you may get the impression that I didn't enjoy this game, which is not true in the slightest. I actually greatly enjoyed this game, but I think I enjoyed what it could have been more than what it was. Infinite Warfare is a game limited by the Call of Duty brand, but the thing is, this game, in so many ways, was desperately trying to distance itself from said brand. However, were it not for the Call of Duty brand, this game would not exist. The way I look at it is like the Halo show. It feels like someone had an idea for a sci-fi show, but couldn't get the idea greenlit, so they slapped Halo in the title, and suddenly it's a show. While Infinite Warfare is leagues better than the Halo show, and to be honest, watching paint dry is also better than the Halo show, my point still stands. The game needs to be its own thing. Free to be what it wants to be. Free to give the characters much needed breathing room. Free to just be itself. But because it was a Call of Duty title, it was restricted to Call of Duty tropes and mechanics. Imagine if this game incorporated light RPG mechanics, allowing players to engage with crew in more meaningful ways. By introducing a large hub area, much larger than the command center we already get in the Retribution, players could interact with their squad mates, much like the Normandy in Mass Effect, fostering deep connections through conversations, personal missions, and side activities. These interactions wouldn't just be window dressing, but would flesh out the crew's personalities, backstories, and relationships. Learning more about their struggles, motivations, and fears would create a stronger emotional bond, making their deaths during missions feel much more impactful. For example, you could spend time with characters outside of missions, discussing the psychological toll of war, the sacrifices they made, or their hopes for life after this conflict. These moments would give players a reason to care beyond just completing the mission objectives. When tragedy strikes and these characters die, the emotional weight would hit harder because you're invested in them on a personal level, much like the devastating moments in Mass Effect when beloved crewmates are lost. This wouldn't mean turning Infinite Warfare into a full RPG, but incorporating mechanics like Metro Last Light, where NPCs are interactable within the train between missions, providing brief but meaningful moments of reflection and connections. Players would still be focused on the game's core fast-paced action, but the added emotional depth from these interactions could elevate the story and make the stakes feel more personal and real. A bit of downtime between high-octane missions could let players feel the weight of the war they're fighting, not just from a strategic perspective, but from a human one as well. But because it was a Call of Duty title, it didn't get that luxury. And that's where the game's greatest potential slips through the cracks. At its core, Infinite Warfare wanted to explore the human cost of war. It wanted to show the toll that leadership, sacrifice, and impossible choices have on soldiers. It was setting up to be something more introspective and emotionally impactful than the franchise has ever done before. But the Call of Duty formula, fast-paced action, constant forward momentum, and the need for spectacle gets in the way of those moments of genuine character development. The moments where the game does slow down, investigating derelict mining operations, sneaking through the wastes of Titan, or those quiet conversations with Salter, Ethan, or Omar are some of the best parts. But they're far too rare. We get brief glimpses into who these characters are, their fears, and their loyalty to each other, but it feels rushed, and before we know it, we're back into the fray with little time to digest what just happened or what's at stake for these characters emotionally. That's why, as much as I enjoyed Infinite Warfare, I can't help but feel it's a missed opportunity. There's a version of this game that could have been truly great, one that wasn't bound by the expectations of a Call of Duty title. It could have carved out its own niche in the sci-fi genre, one focused more on the people fighting the war than the war itself. In the end, Infinite Warfare is a fascinating experiment in the franchise. It dared to be different, and it gave us some genuinely poignant moments of sacrifice and leadership, but it's also a game held back by the very brand that birthed it. Its ambitions were clear, but its execution, while admirable, was constrained by the need to fit into the Call of Duty mold. I don't regret playing this game, and I'm grateful that it exists, and it by no means deserves the hate it gets, but I can't help but wonder what Infinite Warfare could have been if it just had a little more freedom to embrace its own identity.